What's the scariest true story you've ever experienced? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe, and I'd really appreciate it if you leave a like and comment something related to the topic. Let's begin. Story 1. True story time. I was about 4 or 5 years old when my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I stayed with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. The apartment was on the first floor, and I remember it was the middle of summer. My mom had a window open in her room, which was directly behind the bed, just above the headboard. Anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw our cat sitting in the doorway of my mom's room. Her door was open, and you could partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat was usually in bed with us. As I watched him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to wake my mom. In the 3 or 4 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked toward the doorway, and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how my mom did it so fast, but she immediately picked me up and literally threw me out of the screen window. Luckily, we were on the first floor, and it was only about a 3-foot drop. She followed right after me, and we started screaming for help until someone called 911. The police came, but found no signs of forced entry. The only thing unusual was that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe the man had left that way. The strange thing was, my mom swore she had locked the door that night, both the deadbolt and the chain lock. About a week later, while cleaning the kitchen, she opened the water heater closet and found a notebook filled with names and drawings, along with a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been hiding in our apartment and waited until we were asleep. Story 2. A terrifying but true story I experienced when I was 12. I moved in with my dad when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area, except for a family he was friends with, a single mom with 3 kids. Luckily, there was a girl a couple of years older than me. She was 12 when I met her, and over the next couple of years, we got to know each other a little. We weren't super close, but we ended up having the same group of friends. One night, my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be home alone because their mom was at work, and that's where things turned terrifying and tragic. Their mom had been helping a woman through her job and had gotten to know her pretty well. She later found out that this woman's sister had been in a mental institution and had recently been released. That night, while Rob was hanging out with them, there was a knock at the door. My friend thought it was her mom. She had a distinctive way of knocking and opened it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, so he climbed out the window and ran back to his house down the road, not thinking twice about it. But it wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the woman her mom had been helping. She had found out where the family lived and what the mother's work schedule was through conversations with her sister. She came into the house, and this is where I don't know all the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother managed to escape to a neighbor's house to call the police. The woman brutally murdered my friend a week before Christmas. She took her life in an unimaginably violent way. They later had to search through the house to find everything. I don't know exactly where, but they did. I wasn't allowed to attend her funeral. Story 3. Alrighty. This happened in the late 80s or early 90s when I was around 6 or 7 years old. I was home with my sister, who was about 14 or 15 at the time. We grew up in a small Texas town where everyone knew everyone. That night, we were home alone. My parents often let my sister babysit me, and we always got along really well because of our age gap. It was around 8 p.m. in the winter, and deserts get cold at night, so it was already dark. We were sitting in the living room watching TV, something like 60 Minutes, 48 Hours, or Hard Copy, one of those hour-long crime shows on CBS about murders, kidnappings, or trafficking. Basically, a gritty, real-life crime special. The episode we were watching was about a quiet guy who lived next door to someone and suddenly went on a rampage, mutilating them and kidnapping their young daughter. Now, the layout of our house made this even worse. The living room had a big glass door leading to the backyard, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows. Nothing but blackness outside unless the back porch light was on, and it wasn't. The front door, on the opposite side of the room, was solid wood with a glass storm door outside of it. About 45 minutes into the show, while they were talking about the manhunt for the killer, we suddenly heard bam, bam, bam. Loud, heavy knocks on the front door. We jumped up and screamed. Then, total silence. The only lights on were the kitchen light down the hall and the glow from the TV. We tried convincing ourselves it was just the wind. It was West Texas, after all. Maybe one of the porch planters or the rocking chair had blown against the door. A minute or two passed in complete silence, our hearts pounding, until we heard the storm door outside the front door close. That meant someone had opened it to knock like that. We froze in place. My sister crawled over to the TV and turned it off. It was one of those old TVs with a metal dial, so it made a loud thunk when it powered down. Now the only light in the room came dimly from the kitchen down the hall. I don't know how long we sat there. Me kneeling on the floor, my sister crouched by the TV, staring at the front door. Then I turned around to look toward the wall of windows and the glass back door. That's when we heard it, the doorknob turning. It rattled slightly, like someone was testing it gently. It was locked, but only by the knob, not the deadbolt. We held our breath, not making a single sound. And then, bam, 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 bam. The door shook violently as someone tried to force it open, jerking it back and forth. The entire wall of windows rattled, and with each movement I could see my reflection blur and sharpen again. My sister screamed, a blood-curdling scream, and grabbed me off the floor. She dragged me to her bedroom, slammed the door, and shoved her mattress and anything she could find in front of it. Thankfully, she had grabbed the cordless phone, one of those heavy beige ones with the long metal antenna. But in her panic, she couldn't remember the sheriff's number. You had to dial directly back then. So she just hit redial. It called one of her friends instead, and through gasps she told them that someone was trying to break into our house and to get there right now. I was curled up on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. We stayed that way until we saw headlights coming up the driveway. Her friend and their parents had driven straight over. We never found out who it was or why they were there. There were no signs of forced entry, just a couple of scuff marks near the bottom of the back door, though we couldn't remember if they'd been there before. Nothing like that ever happened again, but from that night on, we never forgot to lock every door. Story 4. I've had a few paranormal experiences throughout my life. Most of them were pretty tame. But there's one that truly got to me, and it still sticks with me to this day. About 4 years ago, I was finishing my freshman year of college. I'd lived in the dorms with an awesome roommate and had a great experience overall. Toward the end of that last semester, though, something started to feel off in our hallway. Everyone was still friendly and upbeat, but just walking into the dorms gave you this overwhelming sense of dread. We all brushed it off as final stress, but it felt different. One night, after a long study session, I decided to take a shower before heading to bed. Before I continue, let me explain the layout. Each floor had multiple halls, and every hall had 4 rooms, 2 people per room, or 1 for the RA. At one end was a heavy steel door with a small window, and directly across from it was the bathroom. The whole setup honestly felt more like a prison block than a college dorm. Inside the bathroom, there were 2 sets of sinks, 2 on each side, with huge mirrors facing each other, creating that infinite reflection effect. Past the sinks, there were 2 urinals and a toilet stall on the left and 2 showers on the right. If you stood at the left sinks, you could see into the showers through the mirror if the door was open. At the right sinks, you could see the reflection of the showers. The bathroom door was just like the hall door, a big steel frame with a small window you couldn't really see through. It was always propped open with a giant wooden wedge that couldn't be moved unless you really forced it. Anyway, I was alone in the bathroom, getting ready to shower. I set my change of clothes on the right sink so I could reach them easily later. When I looked up at the mirror, I noticed something faintly shimmering inside the shower stall. As I stared, it seemed to move closer, like it was jumping forward from one reflection layer to the next. It unsettled me, but I figured it was just exhaustion and caffeine. I'd been living on Red Bull, Adderall, and coffee. Still, it kept getting closer. As it drew near, I started to make out vague details. It looked like a dark mass, maybe covered in hair, but as it came into focus, I realized it wasn't hair at all. It was like a long, flowing veil. I could see through parts of it, but from the torso down, it was solid black. The face, I can't even describe it. It looked human, but wrong. The eyes were black, yet somehow glowing. I only saw it for maybe a second, but that image burned itself into my mind. Then, suddenly, the lights went out, and I heard the bathroom door slam shut. Everything was pitch black. I tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Then this overwhelming metallic smell, like blood, filled the air. That's the last thing I remember. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My RA told me he'd gone to use the bathroom later and found me in the shower stall, my shirt covered in blood from a massive nosebleed. He said when he tried asking what happened, all I could say was, "It saw me," before I started panicking again. He called an ambulance, and they had to sedate me on the way to calm me down. When I came to, my parents were there, terrified. The doctors said they thought I'd had a seizure, but after running CAT scans, they found no signs of one. There was no family history of epilepsy, and I'd taken Adderall many times before and since, never with hallucinations or anything similar. To this day, I can't look into a mirror for more than a minute. Being in a room with one for too long makes me break down. I've been in therapy for 3 years because of it, and I've spoken with multiple religious leaders. Other than telling me to turn to God, none of them recognized what I described as anything specifically evil or demonic. The strangest part is, before that night, there were no reports of anything weird in those dorms, and since I left, there haven't been any either. It was just that one horrifying, isolated incident. Story 5. When I was a kid, maybe around 8 to 11 years old, my older sister, who's 7 years older than me, would babysit whenever our parents were out. Back then, she smoked a lot, and my parents made her smoke outside, of course. So I'd usually follow her out into the carport, which faced the street, playing around and annoying her while she smoked. One day, my sister noticed a car sitting at the end of our driveway, a white SUV, I think a mid-90s Bravada or something like that, with a bike rack on top. The windows were so darkly tinted you couldn't see a single thing inside. It just sat there, completely still, until she went back inside. Then it would drive down to the end of the road and park in the church parking lot nearby. When she came back out for another smoke, it would return to the same spot, like it was waiting. It was strange, but my sister's a tough person, so she tried to ignore it. That is, until the next day when it came back again. Same white SUV, same behavior. It would sit at the end of the driveway, not moving, just facing us. I didn't know what the driver was doing, but it felt like whoever was inside was watching her. If I didn't go outside, I'd watch from the window, and sure enough, it would just sit there whenever she stepped out. She eventually told our dad, who was a sheriff's deputy at the time. He called the police to file a report. Officers came out, looked around, but by then the SUV was gone. For months, nothing happened. Then about 9 months later, 4 months since the last sighting, it was back. And for a while, it became a regular thing again. One afternoon, my sister was outside smoking while I played nearby. The SUV showed up, same as always. But this time, she'd had enough. She told me to stay in the carport while she went to confront whoever it was. She started walking down the driveway toward the car, but halfway there she stopped dead in her tracks. Later she told us, "I felt this wave of pure terror, like if I took one more step, I was going to die." She said she'd never felt anything like it, just a paralyzing fear. She turned around and went straight inside. A few days later, our family car was in the shop, so we were all stuck at home for the night. My sister went out to smoke while my parents were inside, and of course, the SUV showed up again. She told me to run inside and tell Dad. My dad grabbed his gun and started walking down the driveway toward the SUV, not pointing it, just holding it at his side. As soon as he stepped out far enough for them to see him, the SUV floored it, speeding down the road and peeling off onto the highway. My dad, being a cop, noted the make, model, and other details right away. But the creepiest part? The license plate had been completely covered in duct tape. We never saw that SUV again after that night. My sister laughs it off now, but I still remember that feeling, standing there in the cold, watching that car sit at the end of the driveway, and knowing someone was inside, watching us. Story 6. I have a few stories that still scare me to this day, though I'm not sure anyone else could really understand them. They came from my own messed up mind. Shortly after I graduated high school, I woke up one morning and found my father dead in our living room. I tried giving him CPR, but he was already gone by the time I got there. The shock of that moment broke something in me. I developed severe PTSD and started having recurring nightmares, the same one, over and over. In the dream, I'd be walking toward the living room, realizing what I was about to see. I'd start screaming before I even got there, and then I'd wake up screaming in real life. This went on for about a year. I barely functioned. I'd stay awake for days at a time, terrified of falling asleep and reliving that morning again. Then one day, I completely broke down. According to my girlfriend, who's now my wife, I tensed up like I was having a seizure for nearly an hour. In my mind, I was trapped, reliving that morning on a loop. Every time I reached the point where I'd walk into the living room, I'd stop myself and scream, a raw, primal scream. My wife said I was doing the same thing out loud while it was happening. Eventually, in the vision, I let myself walk into the living room and see my father's body again. After that, the nightmares finally stopped. Fast forward to 2005. I joined the army and was deployed to Iraq. I was leading a convoy when we got intel that insurgents were sending children into the road to make convoys stop so they could ambush them. I was driving when, sure enough, a young boy ran out about 300 meters ahead of my vehicle. I froze. We had strict orders. Anyone in our path, we were to keep driving. My truck chief was shouting at me to floor it, so I did. The kid jumped out of the way just in time, but I couldn't stop thinking about what almost happened. Later, at the next FOB, I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying it. I eventually drifted off and had a nightmare. In it, I was driving again. The same kid ran out in front of me, but this time, I didn't stop. I hit him. I got out, horrified, and walked around to the back of the truck to check. As I did, that same feeling of dread washed over me. The same one from all those old nightmares back home. I tried to remind myself it wasn't real, that it wasn't the same thing. But when I looked down, it wasn't the kid lying there. It was my father's body. That's when it all came rushing back. I started screaming again, that same primal scream. And when I woke up, I was running. Literally running at full speed, completely disoriented, in a part of the base I didn't even recognize. Thankfully, I haven't had those nightmares again. But ever since then, I've lived with the fear of what my own mind is capable of showing me. And how, no matter how far I go, some horrors never really leave. Story 7. I've told this story before in another thread, but it fits perfectly here. My mother-in-law was one of those genuinely funny, warm, and kind people. She and my wife were incredibly close. Sadly, she passed away when our son was about 4 months old. Fast forward a few years, we were living in a 1930s-era craftsman house in Pasadena, California. Our son was around 3 years old at the time. One night, I was giving him a bath when he suddenly started looking over my shoulder. Not randomly, but at something. He kept staring for a few seconds, then asked me, "Why does Grandma call Mommy that funny name?" I froze. I asked him what he meant, thinking he was talking about my mom. He said, "Why does Grandma call Mommy?" Using the exact nickname my mother-in-law used to call my wife when she was a baby. My wife and I never used that nickname. It wasn't written anywhere, and there was absolutely no way he could have known it. I asked him where he'd heard that, and he casually said, "The farmer told me." I asked who the farmer was, and he said, "My friend." That night, I told my wife what happened, and she broke down crying, not out of fear, but because of the nickname. It was something deeply personal between her and her mom. We were both shaken but also amazed, wondering how our son could possibly know that. The following weekend, my wife was at work and I was home with our son. I heard him in his room, talking like he was having a conversation, saying things like, "Yes, no, I don't know that," and then laughing. I walked in and asked who he was talking to. He said, "The farmer." Now, at this point, I'm already thinking about The Exorcist and Captain Howdy, and I'll admit, it creeped me out. I asked where the farmer was, and he said, "He left when you came in." What the hell? When my wife got home, I told her everything. She was just as unsettled as I was, but we didn't know what to do. We decided that if it happened again, we'd figure out what to do then. A few nights later, in the middle of the night, we both woke up to hear our son talking in his room. His voice was calm but serious. We heard him say, "Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore." We ran to his room, completely freaked out. He was sitting up in bed, wide awake. My wife asked if he was okay, and he said, "Yeah, Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore." He never mentioned the farmer again. Not once. He's 13 now and doesn't remember any of it. But we do. Story 8. I'll share mine. It didn't happen to me, but to my mom when she was a teenager. She's in her mid-60s now, not particularly religious. She doesn't read the Bible much or go to church often, but she prays every night because it brings her comfort. Growing up, we'd sometimes watch spooky movies together, nothing too extreme, more eerie than gory. But whenever I suggested watching The Exorcist, she flat out refused. I mean, absolutely not. She said there was no way she would ever watch anything involving possession or exorcisms. That got me curious. Years later, when Constantine came out, I showed her the trailer to see how she'd react. The moment she saw the girl crawling on the ceiling, she immediately said no again. I should mention, my mom will not allow a Ouija board anywhere near her house. If you even joke about bringing one in, she'll lose it. She'll yell, curse, and demand you drop the subject immediately. I learned that the hard way. So, I finally asked her why she's so terrified of those things. She told me about a night when she was a teenager, sleeping over at a friend's house. They were all hanging out on the floor playing a board game she'd never played before. Turns out, it was a Ouija board, not that she knew what that was at the time. They started asking random questions, giggling, and daring each other. Eventually, they made contact with a spirit. So, naturally, they asked it to show itself. Nothing happened at first, until the lights in every room of the house went out at once. Total darkness. Then, just as suddenly, they flicked back on. Everyone freaked out for a second, but they tried to laugh it off, calling it a coincidence. Then they asked, "Who are you?" The planchette began to move. It slid to D, then E, then V, I, and finally L, devil. My mom thought someone was joking, pushing it on purpose. So they decided to call its bluff and said, "If you're the devil, then show yourself." The TV shut off, and in the dark reflection of the blank screen, my mom and her friends, and even the parents sitting nearby, could see the outline of something sitting next to them. Not clearly human, just a shape. The room went ice cold. Moments later, there was a crash from the kitchen, the sound of things flying off the refrigerator and cupboards slamming open and shut. That was enough. They ended the game, threw the board in the trash, and swore never to touch one again. That night, after everyone went to bed, my mom woke to a loud clanging on the roof, the sound of chains dragging and dogs barking right above her. She tried convincing herself it was just outside, maybe strays, but it went on long enough to terrify her. The next morning, she asked her friend's parents if any neighbors had dogs. They said no, and then they told her they had heard the same thing, chains and dogs on the roof all night. That's why my mom refuses to watch anything about exorcisms. She's convinced that whatever they summoned that night was real, that it was sitting there with them in that living room. And honestly, every time she tells me that story, I get chills. The kind that make you know she isn't making it up. Story 9. When I was about 8 or 9, my family lived in a small, tucked-away neighborhood at the end of a cul-de-sac. The house had a huge backyard, but in one corner sat an old, rusted-out trailer, the flat kind used for towing dirt bikes. That part of the yard always gave us an uneasy feeling. None of us ever went near it, not even our dog. My 2 younger sisters shared a room, but every now and then they'd come sleep in my room because they said they saw strange lights in theirs. My parents brushed it off, saying it was probably just the streetlights outside. One night, I woke up with this overwhelming feeling of anger in the air, not my own, but like I was standing next to someone who was absolutely furious at me. When I looked toward the doorway, I saw the outline of a person standing there, perfectly still. There was a small, glowing red light, like the tip of a lit cigarette. Both my parents smoked, so I figured it was one of them checking in on me. I sat up and said, "Mom? Dad?" No answer. Then, in an instant, the figure and the red light vanished. I yanked the covers over my head and curled up into a tight ball. That's when I felt something tug on my blanket, lightly at first, from the foot of the bed. I froze. Then it tugged again, harder this time. I gripped the blankets as tightly as I could, terrified and unable to move. After a few moments, the pulling stopped. I don't remember falling asleep again, just lying there, heart racing, until morning. When I told my parents what happened, they both swore they'd been asleep all night and said it must have just been a nightmare. Fast forward about 20 years. I'd still sometimes have nightmares about that house, especially about the garage turned den. In those dreams, there was always this dark, gaping corner that looked like a black hole. The Real house was one story, but in my dreams there were stairs leading down into that room, and I always knew that if I got too close to that black space, something evil would grab me. I'd also dream about other houses in the same neighborhood. In the dreams, they were twisted and dangerous, and if I went to them for help, I'd die. One night, my younger sister and I were talking about the old house with our mom, just reminiscing, when she suddenly mentioned having the same kinds of dreams. We'd never talked about them before, but she described almost the exact same thing. In her version, she'd run down the stairs into the kitchen, where the cupboards would be opening and slamming shut by themselves. And in the den, near the same corner where I always saw the black hole, there'd be a man standing there, just watching. We all just sat there for a moment, completely chilled. Even now, whenever I drive through that neighborhood, I get this uneasy feeling, like something's still there, waiting. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe that house was built on something that never wanted to be disturbed. Story 10. This is the story of OM. Back in high school, I had a good friend named Steve. One day, during our freshman year around 2007, he told our group about something terrifying that had happened to his older brother, Tim, a few years earlier. Tim was in college somewhere in New Hampshire. One night, around 2 a.m., he and a friend decided they needed Dunkin' Donuts. The problem was, the nearest one was across the state line. So they hopped in the car and headed out. The route took them through a narrow stretch of highway surrounded by woods. It was quiet, dark, and empty, the kind of road where your headlights only seem to light up the fog. On their way back, a car suddenly pulled in front of them. It was a small red compact car, all its markings scratched off. The only thing that stood out was its license plate. It had a black letter O and a green letter M. From that moment on, they started calling it OM. Right after that, strange things began happening. Tim's phone lost service completely. The radio, which had been playing a jazz station, suddenly cut to Smells Like Teen Spirit. Weird coincidences, maybe, but both of them felt something was wrong. Tim eased off the gas, figuring he'd let the strange car go ahead and put some distance between them. But when he slowed down, OM slowed down too. Tim sped up, OM sped up. Every move they made, the car in front mirrored perfectly. Now they were panicking. The empty woods, the late hour, the eerie car, it was too much. They decided to stop just before a curve in the road. OM drove around the bend and disappeared. They waited. 10, maybe 20 minutes. The woods were silent. Finally, they decided to keep going, hoping OM was gone. But as soon as they rounded the curve, there he was. The same red car. The same distance ahead. Matching their speed exactly. OM wasn't gone. He was waiting for them. They kept driving, terrified, until they reached a fork in the highway. One direction led back toward town, the other deeper into the forest. Tim took the road toward the college. OM didn't follow. The red car turned down the dark road instead. That was the last time Tim ever saw it. Epilogue 1. When Steve told us this story, I didn't believe it. It sounded like an urban legend, something from a chain email or a campfire tale. Even Steve wasn't sure it was real. It was just one of those creepy family stories that get passed down. But then, around 2008 or 2009, I was listening to the local news radio while doing homework. There was a breaking report about a murder in a nearby county the night before. The witness described seeing a car leaving the scene. A small red compact car with a black O and a green M on the license plate. I froze. I was living in suburban Orange County, California. What the hell was OM doing here? The next day, I ran into Steve at school. He'd heard the same broadcast. We both just looked at each other in disbelief. Two things became clear that day. Neither of us was crazy. OM was real. Epilogue 2. This past May, my friend Blake was driving home after dropping off his girlfriend. Again, around 2 a.m. He decided to take a canyon highway, even though it's a dark, winding route at that hour. Halfway through, a car pulled in front of him. A red compact car. Black O, green M. Blake knew the story. He knew the car. He said his heart dropped. He slowed down to keep his distance, but every time he eased off, OM seemed to adjust too. Never too close, never too far. When they neared the end of the canyon, OM suddenly made a U-turn and disappeared back into the darkness. Blake went straight home, locked every door, and didn't sleep that night. That's everything I know about OM. I've never seen the car myself, but after hearing the stories and the radio report, I'm convinced he's real. My personal theory? He's a cross-country killer who moves between states to avoid being caught. I know it's just conjecture, but every time I drive late at night and see headlights in my rearview mirror, I can't help but wonder, what if it's OM? Story 11. These stories have stuck with me my whole life. I grew up in a house on Long Island, in the town of Brentwood, A surprisingly quiet place considering where it was. My dad worked as a taxi driver back then, so he'd usually come home early in the morning, around sunrise, and I'd be up waiting for him. One Saturday, I was sitting in front of the TV watching cartoons when I heard his car pull into the driveway. I ran to the door to greet him, and as he stepped inside, we both heard my mom's voice call out from the bedroom. "Hello, honey. Don't go in the pool. It's not ready yet." We looked at each other, kind of confused. It was 6 in the morning. We weren't about to go swimming, but we shrugged it off. My dad started telling me his usual stories about the odd passengers he'd picked up during his shift. Then, about a minute later, it hit both of us at the same time. It was Saturday. My mom was at work. It was just the two of us in the house. And that voice, the one that sounded exactly like my mother, had come from the empty bedroom. A couple of weeks later, our new neighbors came by to welcome us to the neighborhood. There were 2 mothers, 2 boys, one my age, one a bit older, maybe in 10th grade, and 2 little girls, one blonde and one shy brunette who didn't say much. We all went outside to play soccer while the adults chatted. After a while, I noticed the quiet brunette girl wasn't with us anymore. Curious, I wandered off to look for her and eventually spotted her near the edge of the property, playing in the woods, a place our parents had warned us to stay away from. She smiled and asked if I wanted to play tag with her. I told her I'd rather get everyone else to join, and she just nodded and kept playing alone. I ran back and told the others to come play tag with us. The looks I got were strange, confused. Then one of the mothers said, "We only have one daughter, the blonde one." That's when I learned that a small brown-haired girl had drowned in our pool about 10 years before we moved in. Not long after, her mother died of a heart attack. We lived in that house for another 5 or 6 years. Those years were full of strange, terrifying things, enough stories to fill a book. And I still remember that voice, calling from the bedroom that first morning, sounding exactly like my mom. Story 12. Hopefully I won't make this too long. Here we go. My grandparents, for some reason, had this strange habit of always moving into haunted houses. They didn't look creepy or anything, but weird, unexplainable things would always happen wherever they lived. There are plenty of stories about that, but this one is my personal experience. It was summer vacation, and I was around 13 or 14. Back then, I'd stay up late every night, eating junk food, playing video games, doing typical teenage stuff. Because I was always up so late, I'd notice every little sound in the house. I slept in the room at the very end of the hallway, right across from my grandparents' room, so whenever I heard footsteps in the middle of the night, I always knew it was my grandpa. He had acid reflux and would often get up to grab some Tums from the cabinet in the hall. I got so used to the sound, the soft thud of footsteps on the carpet, pacing down the hall to the cupboard, then back to the bedroom, followed by the faint click of his door closing. But after a while, I started noticing something strange. Sometimes, I'd hear those same footsteps after 1 a.m., long after my grandparents were asleep. I'd open my door to check, but the hallway would be completely empty and dark. I tried to stay logical about it, figuring maybe Grandpa had already gone back to bed before I looked. So the next few times I heard the footsteps, I decided to wait until they reached the far end of the hall, right by the cabinet, before opening my door. When I did, nothing. Just silence. Darkness. Eventually, I got used to it. The footsteps weren't loud, just soft, steady, almost comforting in a weird way. I convinced myself it was the house settling, or maybe I was half asleep. But then came the night I'll never forget. I was lying in bed watching TV. The head of my bed was against the same wall as my bedroom door. I heard the footsteps again, slow, deliberate, moving down the hallway. They reached the far end, paused for a second, then started coming back toward my room. I rolled my eyes, thinking, here we go again. They stopped right outside my door. And then, the doorknob started rattling. Not just a gentle turn. It was rapid, loud, like someone was furiously jiggling it back and forth, trying to open the door without actually doing it. My heart nearly stopped. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the handle, and yanked the door open, half expecting to catch my grandpa laughing at me. But the hallway was pitch black, empty, completely silent. I tiptoed down to my grandparents' room, cracked the door open, and there they were, both fast asleep, snoring. I quietly closed the door, went back to my room, and pulled the covers over my head. That was the last time I ever tried to catch whatever was walking that hallway. Story 13. About 10 years ago, When I was 19, I had a close friend who was just as fascinated by the paranormal as I was. One day, she bought a Ouija-type board called the Psychic Circle. It wasn't exactly like a regular Ouija board. It had words, symbols, even small photos printed on it, and came with a book explaining how to interpret the messages. We tried it a few times, but never got anything interesting out of it. Then one night, she took it over to her aunt's house. Apparently, something did happen, something intense enough that her aunt asked to keep the board for a few days to use it on her own. My friend agreed, and we planned to visit her that weekend to try it together. That Friday, as soon as I got into the car, I felt this heavy sense of dread. I've always been intrigued by the supernatural, and I've had a few weird experiences before, so it wasn't fear of ghosts or anything like that. It was more like my gut screaming, "Don't go." But I ignored it. When we arrived at her aunt's house, the feeling hit me even harder. Her aunt seemed to dislike me from the moment I walked in. Cold stare, tight smile, like she was waiting for me to leave. The air inside the house felt thick, heavy, wrong. I told myself I was just being paranoid and tried to shake it off. Then she brought out the board. It looked old, not like the shiny new one my friend had bought just a week earlier. This thing looked weathered, discolored, almost sun-bleached. The once bright artwork was faded and cracked. My friend immediately asked, "What happened to the board?" And her aunt, without missing a beat, said, "It's been sweating." That made no sense, but before I could even process it, her aunt laid the board on the table and gave me this sharp, suspicious look. I was sweating, my hands shaking, but I decided to play along. I placed my fingers lightly on the planchette. "And oh," her aunt said immediately. I froze. She stared at me and said, "They don't like you. They don't want to answer your questions. I can just tell." That was it for me. The feeling in that room was so oppressive, like the air itself was watching. We left shortly after, my friend visibly upset. She said her aunt had never acted like that before, and she was freaked out by how weirdly possessive she'd become over the board. Her aunt refused to give it back. My friend never saw it again. A few weeks later, I bought my own Psychic Circle board, just to see if maybe we could try again, but nothing ever happened. No movement, no messages, nothing at all. I took that as a sign and gave it away. I haven't touched a board since. Story 14. About 2 years ago, my ex and I went through a really ugly breakup, the kind that drains you completely. There was a lot of crying, shouting, and saying things we couldn't take back. Over time, it became clear that she had some deep emotional issues and wasn't the person I thought she was. There was anger, manipulation, and a lot of lying. The strange part was, she was the one who dumped me. Several times, actually. But when I finally accepted it and told her it was over for good, she was furious. I wasn't perfect either, but by that point, it was toxic on both sides. A few weeks after that final breakup, I started seeing someone new. It wasn't planned. It just happened, and it was a healthy relationship. But when my ex found out, she completely lost it. One day, she showed up at my place to pick up a few of her things. I figured we'd just get it over with quietly, but instead, she sat down on my bed, pulled out a folded note, and told me to read it out loud. I asked why, and she said, "Just read it." I opened it, and it was basically a written rant tearing me apart. It said I was incapable of love, a horrible person, that I ruined lives, that I deserved to die. I told her I wasn't reading that, but she started screaming, absolutely unhinged, until I finally gave in just to calm her down. I read it out loud, word for word. When I finished, she reached into her purse and pulled out a gun. Loaded. She sat there, holding it, shaking, crying, and screaming that she was going to kill me. That she knew what would happen, that she'd go to prison, that she'd be caught, and she didn't care because, in her words, "At least you'll be off this planet." I can't even describe what that moment felt like. I just remember sitting there, frozen, tears running down my face, trying to keep my voice calm while begging her to put it down. I told her she wasn't a killer, that she didn't want to do this, that she needed to go live her life and forget about me. Somehow, after what felt like forever, she put the gun back in her bag. We both sat there shaking. Before she left, she hugged me. It was the most surreal moment of my life, hugging someone who had almost just ended it. We never spoke again after that. I found out recently that she got engaged to someone new. I hope, for everyone's sake, that she finally got the help she needed. Story 15. When I was about 6 or 7, my family went to visit my aunt for Christmas. She had recently divorced her husband, a hot-headed Czechoslovakian guy who had started to unravel a bit. He'd been calling her non-stop, threatening her over the phone for days, but nothing had actually happened until that night. We had just immigrated to Canada and were staying at my aunt's house while waiting for our own home to be ready. My aunt was sitting in the den when she suddenly looked out the window and saw her ex walking up the driveway, carrying a hunting rifle. She screamed. My dad, and I'll say this forever, has absolute balls of steel. The moment he heard her scream, he sprang into action. He locked the doors, grabbed me, my mom, and my aunt, and rushed us upstairs. He locked us in one of the bedrooms and pushed a dresser in front of the door. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed a buck knife and went back downstairs. Everything that happened next, I only know from the stories my parents told afterward. My mom called the police from the upstairs phone while we listened in terror. My aunt's ex broke through the front door, splintering it open near where my dad was waiting. The two of them collided instantly, fists flying, in a brutal fight right there in the foyer. At some point, the gun hit the floor, clattering away. I don't know what happened to the knife. My dad still won't tell me, even today. When I asked once, he just said, it was over fast. The police arrived minutes later and arrested my aunt's ex. But the part that chilled everyone to the bone came after. During the sweep of the property, the officers found someone else hiding in the backyard, the ex's father. He was a bitter, abusive drunk who'd hated my aunt for years. He had been crouched behind the shed, holding a knife, apparently waiting for us to run outside so he could finish the job. The old man was deported, and my aunt's ex went to prison. He got out years later and still insists that he and his father just wanted to scare her. But that night, hiding upstairs and hearing the chaos downstairs, the screams, the thuds, the breaking wood, I knew better. My dad's quick thinking and sheer courage saved all of our lives. And to this day, I still remember the sound of that fight and the silence that followed. Story 16. This didn't happen to me, but to my Nana, and it still gives me chills every time I think about it. Back when my Nana was a young mother, she had a close friend she'd known since her nursing days. They had grown up together, started families, and stayed in touch through everything. One evening, her friend's ex-husband called my Nana. He sounded deeply depressed and said he needed someone to talk to. My Nana wanted to help, but she had just given birth to my father and was breastfeeding at the time. She gently told him she couldn't come over, but that she could talk to him another day. He was quiet for a moment, then simply said, I'll see you soon then, before hanging up. That night, my granddad was working the night shift, so Nana was home alone with the baby. Around 9 p.m., she heard the front gate open. It was one of those loud, squeaky gates that she'd intentionally kept that way. She liked knowing when someone was coming up to the house. She assumed it was my granddad coming home early or maybe returning because he'd forgotten something. But then the dog, Ben, their big, gentle family dog, suddenly stiffened and began to growl at the door. He never growled. He'd been raised around 4 children and was as calm and patient as a dog could be. But now, his hackles were raised, and he was baring his teeth at the closed door. Then he started barking furiously. My Nana tried to stand up and open the door to see who was out there. Maybe some kids playing a prank, but she couldn't move. She said it was like her whole body locked up. She was completely frozen in her chair, unable to speak or even lift her hand. Then, everything went cold. She said it wasn't like a draft, it was unnaturally cold, even though the fire in the hearth was blazing. The air around her felt icy, almost suffocating. It lasted about 2 minutes, and then, just as suddenly, it lifted. She said she felt calm, peaceful even, as if the fear had been washed away. A few seconds later, she heard the gate creak again, opening, then closing, as if someone was walking away. The next morning, when my granddad came home, she told him what had happened. The call, the noises, the cold, the time she'd felt frozen. He went quiet. Then he told her something that made her blood run cold all over again. Her friend's ex-husband had taken his own life that night, at around 8:50 p.m. It was about a 10-minute walk from his house to hers. Story 17. I've got 2 stories, not the scariest things ever, but they definitely stuck with me. Story 1. I was about 12 when this happened. My parents were having work done on the outside of our house. New windows, siding, the usual stuff. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and my bed was right up against the wall under the windows. One night, I woke up to this weird sound outside my window. It was faint at first, like small rocks being tossed at the glass. Because there were ladders and other construction equipment outside, I tried to convince myself it was just the wind knocking something loose. But every few minutes, I'd hear it again, louder this time, until I was pretty sure someone was climbing one of those ladders. I did what every terrified kid does in that situation. I lay completely still and pretended to be asleep, hoping it would just go away. That worked for a bit, until I heard actual knocking and scratching right on my window. Then came the sound of someone trying to open it. That's when I jumped out of bed and sprinted into my parents' room, which was literally just 5 feet away, yelling, "I think there's someone outside my window." It took my dad a few seconds to wake up, but once he did, he marched straight into my room to check. I stood there holding my breath, expecting the worst. Then I heard him shout something, followed by a familiar voice. It was my older brother. Apparently, he'd snuck out earlier that night, locked himself out, and was trying to wake me up so I could let him back in without our parents knowing. Needless to say, it didn't go as he planned. Story 2. Fast forward a few years, I was home from college for spring break, and by then my parents had divorced. My dad had moved out, and my mom was basically living with her new husband, but they kept the house, so I'd have somewhere to stay when I was home. So at this point, I was living there alone, just me and my tiny, loud-as-hell dachshund. One night, I was watching TV in the den when my dog suddenly started barking like crazy from the other room. At first, I figured she was just barking at nothing, like she usually does, so I called for her. But she wouldn't stop. I peeked around the corner and saw her standing on her hind legs, paws on the big floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over our huge yard, barking her head off. She wouldn't come to me, wouldn't stop, just stared out into the dark like she was seeing something out there. The thing is, our yard was massive, big enough that we could have sold half of it as a separate lot, and it was lined with tall hedges. No one could have just wandered by, and it was pitch black outside, so whatever she saw shouldn't have been visible anyway. At this point, I'm alone in this big, quiet house, my heart racing, imagining home invaders or serial killers. I grab my phone, type in 911, but don't hit call, just in case. Slowly, I start walking toward the window, trying to stay low so whatever's out there can't see me. I finally get next to my dog, look out the window, and see it. A white plastic grocery bag, floating around in the wind, American Beauty style, catching just enough moonlight to look eerie and alive. That's what my dog had been barking at nonstop. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. Then I shut the curtains and poured myself a drink. Because, honestly, I think my heart needed one. Story 18. Very creepy story here. It haunted me well into my teens. When I was around 11 or 12, my parents had just separated and were in the middle of a divorce. They sold our old house, and my mom and I moved out to this isolated farm on a dirt road called Mitchell Road, a place barely anyone even knew existed. It was named after the farmer who used to own all the land there. To give you an idea, Mitchell Road was about a mile long, winding uphill through dense New York forest. Halfway up, there was a pond and a really nice house with perfectly trimmed bushes and a big yard. Another half-mile past that, there was a large horse farm on the right with a barn and a farmhouse, and on the left, our place. We lived in a converted barn that was attached to a huge old yellow farmhouse split into 2 apartments. 2 families lived there, plus us. Down the little driveway was a large trailer, and right past it was this creepy old area where, according to the landlord, cows used to be slaughtered. Beyond that was another home, and even farther up the hill, buried deep in the woods, was our landlord's house. Even before anything happened, the place just had an eerie feel. My room was upstairs, and my window looked down the road toward the fields below. In one of those fields stood a massive metal crucifix, about 20, maybe 25 feet tall. We thought it was odd, but in upstate New York, especially in that area, people are pretty religious, so we didn't think much of it. Then, about a week after we moved in, I woke up in the middle of the night to this pulsating orange glow lighting up my bedroom. My first thought was that something was on fire, maybe the barn. But when I saw the shadows of the trees flickering across my walls, I realized the light was coming from behind them, in the field. I went to the window and looked out. What I saw is burned into my memory forever. The massive cross was lit on fire. The light was so bright it illuminated the entire field, and around it, I could see smaller fires, like torches or bonfires arranged in a circle, and moving around them shapes. At first, they were just dark figures, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized they were people on horseback, wearing long black robes and pointed hoods. They were circling the burning cross. That's the last thing I remember before I blacked out, literally collapsed back onto my bed. The next morning, my mom woke me up for school. I immediately looked out the window. The cross was still standing, but now it was silver and charred, still faintly smoking. The smaller fires had burned out, but the ground was scorched, and later that day, when I got home, I went to look. There were horse tracks everywhere. Empty liquor bottles, too. I told my mom what I'd seen, and she didn't even hesitate. She packed our things that day, and we left. She put me in therapy for a few weeks afterward because I couldn't stop talking about it. The therapist thought I'd dreamed it. I knew I hadn't. Years later, I looked the place up, 131 Mitchell Road, Hoosick Falls, New York, and the cross is still there. You can even see it from satellite images. It's this tall white or silver cross with blue trim, still standing in the same field. Even creepier, across the road there's this weird structure in the woods, kind of like a greenhouse, filled with furniture and taxidermy, all wrapped in plastic. I stumbled into it once while exploring and was confronted by an old man who looked like he'd stepped straight out of the 1940s. He yelled, "Hey kid, you're not supposed to be in here. It's posted property. Get the hell out." I ran all the way home and never told my mom. I knew she'd be furious if she found out I'd been snooping around. That was the second and last time I ever talked about what happened. The first was in therapy. Years later, there was a fatal crash on that same road, a young couple. It happened around 5 a.m., and no one found them until the next day. Nobody in town knew who they were or why they were even out there. Their own families didn't know either. When I was in high school, I ran into the woman who lived in that nice house near the pond. She worked as the school nurse. I mentioned how eerie it always felt living up there, and she just said quietly, "Yeah, old man Mitchell was an occultist. He had a big family, multiple wives, about 25 people. They used to perform sacrifices and rituals out by that cross every full moon. Maybe it was just a story, but after what I saw that night, I'm not so sure." Story 19. About 15 years ago, I was working for a small company with around 75 employees. Things were fine until the owner decided to sell it. The new management came in and immediately cleaned house, firing about 15 people in one day. One of them was a guy I worked with. I'll call him Dave. Dave was an odd person. Most people didn't really like him. He had a short fuse, yelled at coworkers sometimes, and had some noticeable hygiene problems, bad dandruff, strong body odor, that kind of thing. Nobody was shocked when he got fired, and to be honest, a lot of people were quietly relieved. About a week after the layoffs, I was at work when I got a phone call from Dave. He sounded calm, even friendly. He said he wanted to take me out to lunch to thank me for teaching him how to run a few machines before he was fired. Skills he said would help him find another job. I agreed, thinking maybe it'd be nice to catch up and wish him well. A few days later, he showed up right at lunchtime. I figured he'd be taking a few of us out, but when I walked out to the parking lot, it was just him. That was the first small red flag, but I didn't think much of it. At first, lunch was normal. We talked about work, his job search, and how much had changed at the company. But pretty quickly, his tone shifted. He started ranting about how unfairly he'd been treated, how much he'd given to the company, how everyone turned on him. I let him vent, trying to stay polite. Then, toward the end of lunch, he said something that made my stomach twist. He told me I was one of the only people he actually liked there. Then he added, almost casually, that there were a few people he'd love to hurt. I laughed nervously, hoping he was joking or exaggerating, but he didn't laugh back. When we got in his car to drive back, things got worse. He started talking about how easy it would be to lock the building's doors with boards from the outside and burn the place down. He mentioned other ways he could do damage. Then, as we pulled into the parking lot, he said, "Don't worry. Even if I did something like that, I wouldn't hurt you. You're my friend." The way he said it sent chills down my spine. I got out of the car as fast as I could, thanked him for lunch, and went straight inside. From my boss's desk, you could see the parking lot through the window. I glanced out and saw Dave still sitting in his car, just sitting there, not leaving. I told my boss we needed to call the police. I explained what Dave had said and how he was just sitting out there. My boss didn't hesitate. He called 911. Within minutes, several officers showed up. They talked to Dave, got him out of the car, and put him in the back of a squad car. Then they opened his trunk. Inside, they found several boards, some rope, and a few guns. The police talked to him for a while longer, and eventually he agreed to go with them voluntarily to get help. I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't called, but based on what was in that trunk and the layout of our building, he could have hurt a lot of people in a very short amount of time. I didn't get much work done the rest of that day. Honestly, just thinking about how close that came still makes my skin crawl. Story 20. I was lying in bed one night with my boyfriend at the time. The lights were off, and we weren't talking, just lying there quietly, both lost in our own thoughts. Then, out of nowhere, he rolled over and hugged me really tightly. I hugged him back, thinking it was just a sweet, random moment. But then this feeling hit me. If I hadn't already been lying down, it probably would have knocked me over. It was an overwhelming wave of dread, deep, heavy, almost suffocating. I've had panic attacks before, but this wasn't that. This was something else entirely. It felt external, like it wasn't coming from me. I squeezed him tighter, terrified, and I remember realizing that even though he's always naturally warm, I felt cold in his arms. Not just chilly, ice cold. And that's when I felt it. This awful, evil presence in the corner of my room. I couldn't see anything, but it was like when you just know someone's standing behind you. The air felt thick and wrong, and I swear it felt like something was watching us. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Jay, do you feel that?" And he said, "Yeah, the cold, the feeling." It lasted maybe 30 seconds, a minute at most, but it felt like forever. Jay suddenly grabbed his phone and said he was going to call his friend Matt, a guy who was studying to be a youth pastor. I got up, turned the lights on, and sat back down beside him while he put Matt on speakerphone. Jay explained what was happening, and Matt immediately started praying for us over the phone. We both closed our eyes, listening quietly, praying along in our heads. As he prayed, the heaviness in the room began to lift. The air didn't feel cold anymore. It was like whatever had been there was gone. When Matt finished praying, he asked if we were okay, and we started to calm down, chatting a bit just to shake it off. Then, out of nowhere, Matt asked, "Hey, were you two talking while I was praying?" We both said no. We hadn't said a single word. Matt went quiet for a second and then said, "Because while I was praying, I heard a deep, gravelly voice say, 'Stop.' And when I heard it, I got this horrible, dark feeling, like something didn't want me to finish the prayer." That's when we both completely lost it. Jay hung up, grabbed his stuff, and left immediately. He was too freaked out to stay. I was mad he left me there alone, but honestly, I couldn't blame him. I went to my dad's room, shaking, and told him I thought something evil had been in my room. He was half asleep and just mumbled, "If there's something in there, I've got a gun. I'll shoot it." "Thanks, Dad." Real comforting. The feeling never came back after that night. The room felt normal again, and life just went on. But I still think about it sometimes. If it really was a demon, what was it doing there? What did it want? Why just that one night? I'll probably never know. Story 21. Back in high school, I was part of our school's cheer squad. Every summer before the new school year started, we'd go to cheer camp, a few days at a nearby university where we'd learn new routines, stunts, and compete with other teams. Now, I was not your typical cheerleader. I liked my space. While the others were always hanging out, blasting music, and being loud, I preferred peace and quiet. I'd usually stay in my dorm room reading or listening to music on my little boombox. I shared the room with two other girls, but during downtime, they were always across the hall with everyone else. That meant I usually had the room to myself, which, that night, turned out to be a bad thing. It was our last night there. I was lying on my stomach, facing away from the dorm door, just zoning out and listening to music when I heard a voice, a female whisper, right behind me. "Turn around." I froze for a second, then slowly turned my head. Nobody was there. I shook it off, thinking maybe I imagined it or the sound had carried from the hallway. I went back to what I was doing. Then, again, a whisper, clearer this time. "Turn around." Okay, weird. I got up, opened the door, and peeked out into the hall. Empty. The girls across the hall always had their door open when they were hanging out, but now it was shut and completely silent. I figured maybe someone was pranking me, so I went back inside. I hadn't even sat down when I heard it again. "Turn around." And this time, there were two sharp taps on my right shoulder. I jumped up so fast I almost fell over. There was no one there. I checked under the beds, behind the door, even the shared closet that connected to our coach's room on the other side. Nothing. Nobody. At that point, I was done. I grabbed my stuff and walked straight across the hall to the other girls' room. They were all laughing and singing like normal, so I tried to play it cool, but when I told my friend what happened, she looked way too excited. She was really into ghost stuff. She wanted me to tell everyone, but I decided not to. Later that night, our coach and one of her friends gathered everyone around to tell ghost stories before bed. The last story they told hit a little too close to home. They said that the white gazebo out front, the one right outside my dorm window, had been built years ago by a wealthy couple who donated a ton of money to the school for their daughter's wedding. But the daughter found out her fiancé was cheating on her shortly before the ceremony, and she hung herself from that very gazebo. I remember going completely still. That gazebo was the first thing I'd noticed when I moved into my room, directly outside the window, lit up by a small floodlight at night. I told my friend to go ahead and tell my story. When she did, the smiles and laughter vanished from our coach and her friends' faces. They just looked at each other in silence. Nobody slept in my dorm room that night. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.